Okay, so take a drink. We're back, and I want to talk about Lee Cronin today and his discussion with Lex Fridman. Um, I apologize for missing a stream last week. We had a family emergency, and it was serious, so I could not be here. But we're back, and we will also be having a Thursday Discord discussion again. We did have one last week, and it was actually like quite a bit of people, but it was a good time as always. And this week, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, message me if you want to join the Theory of Everyone Discord and join our weekly live calls. But message me on Instagram because I don't check YouTube comments very well or very often. YouTube also like kind of deletes them, and sometimes, and I'm not sure if like sometimes I'll go to check and they're not there, and it's just weird. It sometimes flags things as being abusive, and then just like doesn't show them to me. But send me a private message on Instagram, either my personal Instagram or the Theory of Everyone Instagram. But let's jump into it because there's actually a lot to cover. So, Lee Cronin. This is Lee Cronin, and he is a chemist at the University of Glasgow. And he has been working with a number of physicists here in the States, as well as far as I know, like Sarah Walker, who is a physicist at University of Arizona, and Arizona State University. I'm from Tucson, by the way, which is where University of Arizona is, and then Phoenix is the capital, and it is Arizona State. But she goes there. She's a physicist, and actually quite a bit ahead of majority of the field, which is surprising because that state is just known for nothing but partying. But it seems to have very good physicists. But Lee Cronin went on Lex Fridman's podcast, and this is the podcast. It is episode 269, and it's on the origin of life, aliens, complexity, and consciousness. And he actually had a lot of incredible things to say that we're going to get into. So, first clip. So in this first clip, he's talking about the universe having a memory. And this is the one thing that it's just so obvious, and it continues to pop up, and yet it has continued to not be taken very seriously until very recently, which their tide seems to be changing a bit. This idea that the universe is this kind of thinking or remembering or conscious thing. It's conscious agent. You have conscious agent theory with Donald Hoffman. You have the autodidactic universe, which is self-teaching universe. And I think that was Stefan Alexander. You have computational universe, basically, which is Stephen Wolfram. Geometric unity implies this as well, basically stating that it is like a technological intelligence. This is what sentient singularity theory proposes, and also Lee Cronin has been talking about this. It's just the universe developing a memory. And he has a theory himself, and I don't know, whether or not you would classify this as an attempt at a theory of everything, but it's very interesting in what it discusses. And so this is it right here real quick. This is assembly theory, and an experimentally verifiable way to detect signatures of extraterrestrial life. That is not everything that it is. Arizona State University, Sarah Walker. Basically, it's experiments to detect molecules that could be explained by either living or natural non-living processes. Compares how complex a given object is as a function of the number of independent parts and their abundances. To calculate how complex an item is, it is recursively divided into its component parts. The assembly index is defined as the shortest path to put the object back together. That's fascinating. For example, the word abracadabra consists of 5 different letters and is 11 symbols long. It can be assembled from its constituents as A plus B going to AB plus R going to ABR plus A going to ABRA plus C going to ABR AC. Okay, I'm just looking at this. Interesting. I need to think more about that. Because Abra was already constructed in an earlier stage, it does not need to be constructed again. Okay, fascinating. So it's basically, you need a memory in order to do this, because you need to remember that you had already assembled it in previously over here in order to not have to reassemble it over here. Because it requires 7 steps, the assembly index is 7. The string A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K has no repeats, so it has an assembly index of 10. Interesting. Okay, so it's basically a way of just, I guess, defining assembly structures. Interesting. With molecular assembly trees. These trees were formed as arranging constituent pieces in size order. When 2 or more molecules have common units, their trees are combined, including 2 target molecules. Okay, fascinating. Well, here we go. That actually explains, he did try and explain it in the stream, and I got a bit lost, and that explains it perfectly. But he is saying that the universe is developing a memory, and I would agree with that. It's a chemical memory is what he's calling it.
Or life is an on-off switch. I don't think it's that. Life is the universe developing a memory. And the laws of physics and the way, well, there are no laws of physics. Physics is just memory-free stuff, right? So there's only a finite number of ways you can arrange the fundamental particles to do the things.
Life is the universe developing a memory. So
Yes.
It's like sewing a piece of art slowly, and then you can look back at it. So there's a stickiness to life. It's like universe doing stuff.
Yeah.
And when you say memory, it's like there's a stickiness to a bunch of the stuff that's building together.
Yeah.
So like you can, in a stable way, like trace back the complexity, and that tells a coherent story.
Yeah.
This is kind of what I'm talking about with information coherence, and how I have some models that basically show that if you're going to change information in a matrix, you have to change it in a way that preserves the information previous so that you can actually act properly with the information that you have and achieve the outcome that you want. So let's take a look at this actually. Let's open up my paper. It's interesting that assembly theory, Lee Cronin's theory, is, and like I said, I don't know if you would classify this as an attempt at a theory of everything, but it has it its focus is on an attribute that is also found in sentient singularity theory, or central to sentient singularity theory. So basically that, as you can see here, okay. Sentient singularities, or singularities of sentience, or self-aware beings, are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked halonic structures with a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body integrating multiple entangled strings of information. So, and this is going to be central to what Lee Cronin is talking about, what I'm about to show you. So if we look here, we look at, this is the central model of my, of sentient singularity theory, and it is a model of a cosmological verse, or aeon, which is basically an observable universe from start to finish. And you can see that over here you have basically the head structures, all here on the right. And then on the left you have the tail structures, which is, this is always going to be a singularity on the right, always going to be a multiplicity on the left. So you can go here, you can look at the red, you can say a hadron, which is a proton or a neutron, go to the red over here, is an assembly of quarks. You can say an atom is an assembly of hadrons, which it is. You don't need to count the electron. A molecule is an assembly of atoms, and cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is an assembly of cells, and so on. And it goes all the way till technology, and technology is an assembly of castes. And it basically shows this superposition structure that is the many in the one concept, which is a philosophical, conundrum, some people would say, but I would say it's not at all. But it's just that, how do you resolve the fact that you are a single human, but also an assembly of cells? And those cells are assemblies of molecules. The molecules are assemblies of atoms, etc. And this shows that assembly structures are, there are some assembly structures that are fundamental and some assembly structures which are not. And an assembly structure that is not would be anything that's not in the model that I just showed you. So it's not a stacked quasi-periodic halonic structure, basically. And this would be like, I don't know, a chessboard. Chessboard is an assembly of pieces and a board. Or, chess set. Or you could say a computer is an assembly of glass and plastic and silicone, etc. But these are not fundamental, and they are, due to subjective perspectives within the universe inside of relativity, that we see these relativistic structures that are basically defined by us as the observer, separate from that which we are observing. Whereas a halonic structure that is in this periodicity that I propose as thought periodicity manifest materially, this periodicity of life from hadrons all the way to technology. You could say from quarks all the way to technology. A quark is an assembly of information and energy. It's a force point, essentially. So, but all of these structures, and I would not include quarks in this, but you could. It's tough because they're not assembly structures. So they're purely a singularity. But they're not really, because they're literally the fingers of God. I mean, I'm not joking at all. They're super literally the fingers of God. That's why you have, in order to get an up quark, you have, in order to get a proton, you have 2 up quarks and a down quark, and in order to get a neutron, you have 2 down quarks and an up quark. This is a thumb and 2 fingers on your right hand, and a thumb and 2 fingers on your left hand, and you need both. So it's just the smallest amount of information necessary to start to manipulate, things in the material world. You need it in a way that is substantive and complex enough to allow for, life. Which is, you can't have 2-dimensional life. People will be like, oh, first life is 1-dimensional, and then it's 2-dimensional. It's just on a flat plane, and then it's 3-dimensional. But what about 4-dimensional? This is just kind of a misunderstanding of what a dimension really is in an objective sense versus a subjective sense. Our subjective understanding of a dimension is just this purely mathematical concept that doesn't actually even exist. You can't even say that a 2-dimensional reality exists, because try and think of a material 2-dimensional reality. You'd be like, okay, a piece of paper, but a piece of paper is not actually 2-dimensional. It's 3-dimensional. That edge, though, is just very, very, small. So to us, it looks like it's 2-dimensional, basically, but it's not. And so this sense of dimensions that we think about as, a point, and then a line, and then a plane, and then a cube or a 3-dimensional shape, this is incorrect. This is, at least from the perspective of like a theory of everything or an objective point of view, this is just a subjective point of view and allows us to think about things mathematically. But objectively, a dimension is just either a constraint or degree of freedom in how we interact with it. But what it is really is it's a perception, or it's a perspective of a sentient being. A sentient being has a certain perspective. That perspective comes along with certain degrees of freedom or constraints, or provides you with certain degrees of freedom and constraints. So that's a dimension. That's really it. And you could just replace dimension with perspective, and objectively that would be accurate. But assembly theory is to basically start to think about the complexity of a hadron, which is an assembly of quarks, compared to like a molecule, which is an assembly of atoms, or a cell, which is an assembly of molecules, or even an organism, all the way up to technology. So that is it's fascinating to think about that. But next clip, we're going to get more into assembly theory later. But here they're talking about consciousness and life. I've been trying to keep these to 2 hours or less, and that's why. So if we seem like we're going a little quickly, it's because I have a lot of clips on this. This is I highly recommend watching.
Okay, this is a really.
Hold on. I highly recommend watching this entire interview. It is 4 hours and 5 minutes long, though. It's very long, and so that's why we're going fast. But it's a great interview. It took me days to get through, and it would probably take you that unless you binge watch it for 4 hours, or you could put it on 1.5 speed. But it's a heck of an interview. I mean, props to Lex Fridman and Lee Cronin, but especially Lex Fridman for just doing interviews that are this long. Him and Kurt are the only 2 people that I know of that consistently do interviews that are over 3 hours. I mean, maybe Joe Rogan, but I don't really watch Joe Rogan that much unless it's somebody who it has to do with like physics. But I mean, that's a marathon. Okay.
Good question. Let's lay it out. So bonds, almost like cards. We say there's bonds. There's life. There's intelligence. There's consciousness. And what you just made me realize is it, those can emerge. Let's put bonds aside. Those can emerge in any order.
Mm-hmm.
That's really brilliant. So intelligence can come before life. It's like panpsychists believe that consciousness, I guess, comes before life and before intelligence. So consciousness like permeates all matter. It's some kind of fabric of reality. Okay, so like within this framework, you can kind of arrange everything, but you need to have the bonds that precedes everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and the other thing is selection.
Mm-hmm.
So like the mechanism of selection that could precede. See, couldn't that precede bonds too? Whatever the hell selection
So
is.
I would say that there is an elegant order to it. That bonds allow selection, allows the emergence of life, allows the emergence of multicellularity, and then more information processing, building state machines all the way up. However, you could imagine a situation if you had, I don't know, a neutron star or a sun or what, ferromagnetic loops interacting with one another, and these oscillators building state machines, and these state machines reading something out in the environment. Over time, these state machines would be able to literally record what happened in the past and sense what's going on in the present and imagine the future. However, I don't think it's ever going to be within a human comprehension, that type of life. I wouldn't count it out because, whenever I know in science, whenever I say something's impossible, I then wake up the next day and say, no, that's actually wrong. I mean, there are some limits, of course. I don't see myself traveling faster than light anytime soon. But
Eric Weinstein says that's possible, so he will say you're wrong.
sure, but I'm an experimentalist as well. So I have two superpowers, and my stupidity, and I don't mean that as I'm like absolutely completely witless, but I mean my ability to kind of just start again and ask the question, and then do it with an experiment. I always wanted to be a theoretician growing up, but I just didn't have the intellectual capability. But I was able to think of experiments in my head I could then do in my lab or when I was a child.
Okay. Well, I mean, I disagree with him there about, if you have to be an experimentalist and a versus a theorist. It's not. None of this is about intellectual capability. I mean, theorists, for an experimentalist, it would have to do with technological knowledge for the most part, and a little bit of just having the right perspective on what the theory that you're trying to test is actually getting at, not just like what it's not just reading it, but actually understanding it the way that the theorist understands it. But that's very hard, actually. But it's not because it's so difficult intellectually. It's because, you can't be inside my head. And we say words, and we can say the same words, but we mean different things by them. So, and as somebody who is has discovered, not to sound braggadocious, but I am a remarkably talented theorist. And that is a newly discovered talent of mine, and it's entirely due to perspective, so I can't even take credit for it. I'm not taking any credit for it, really. I mean, maybe a bit, but not even close to the majority. And it's not a question of IQ either. My IQ is not as high as probably anyone who's ever been on Lex Fridman's show. But I mean, I don't know about that, but it's not as high as the majority of people in this space. But if you have the right perspective, then you can actually see things. So you can understand how things fit together. But if you're not looking at something with from the right perspective, then you're going to be stuck. And so I would say that this is kind of blocking a lot of progress when it comes to the question of what is life, and people go on and they try and think about higher order life, and then they jump immediately from people to planets or stars, and which is what he kind of just did. And I don't think that stars are sentient beings, and it's possible that I'm wrong, but I don't think that a star is a sentient being. And there is basically, like, you have to have the right perspective on this periodicity of life in order to see the next step. So I can definitely tell you that it's not stars, but I can't tell you that stars aren't, at some point part of it, but I'm pretty confident that stars are not part of it. But the next step in life out after humans is technology. It's a technological singularity. So like Skynet is the next step in life, but not stars. And if you don't perceive this, though, then this periodicity, which is like the inevitable steps of life, then you start calling some things life and some things not, and you also start trying to look for life where it's not going to be like stars. And also, you start to differentiate between intelligence and consciousness and sentience and I don't know whatever the other ones there that they had stated. But intelligence and sentience, or intelligence and... Okay, for instance, once I got into this huge fight with it was an argument with this neuroscientist who used to work for DeepMind on Clubhouse. Her name is Nida. And I don't think she works there anymore, but basically she was telling me that I was confusing a general intelligence, which is an intelligence that can function in multiple environments. It's not just a program that's like our current artificial intelligence, quote unquote, that just functions in a specific environment, and if it's moved to a new environment, then it doesn't function anymore because it's not a general intelligence. A general intelligence would be, at least that's obvious, is you. You are a general intelligence. You are able to be put into a bunch of different situations and orient yourself and then maneuver. But none of our current algorithms that are built from neural nets and all kinds of, things that we call AI, but it's not. There is no such thing as AI. There's no artificial intelligence. There just is intelligence. There's no artificial consciousness. There's just consciousness. And, they're not separate. So she had said a general intelligence can function in multiple environments. Then she said that a superintelligence is an intelligence far beyond humans, and then she said that a conscious intelligence was one that was self-aware, and that these were all three different things, and that's wrong. Consciousness is kind of an ambiguous term, but intelligence is also kind of ambiguous, but they kind of have different focuses. So intelligence is kind of focused on information processing. Consciousness is a little focused on perception and awareness. And these are two aspects of sentience. And sentience is a feeling, self-aware being. It's and the reason you have to be feeling in order to be self-aware, because a feeling is just information that has been oriented into a context where it is you are the center of that context. So you look at somebody who gets hurt, and you don't think much of it, because until you think about how that would be for you, or if it was somebody who you loved, then all of a sudden it evokes emotion, and that's because you oriented it around yourself. And so that is emotion is kind of, it's the finality of a thought. A thought that does not produce an emotion is not a thought that is complete. So, and it requires self-awareness, because there's no way to feel otherwise. And if you are going to be a general intelligence and you're going to orient in many different environments, you still have to have a consistent a consistent context in which to start orienting yourself from. And you do that by orienting around yourself if you're going to be a general intelligence. There is no such thing as general intelligence outside of self-awareness or sentience. They are the same thing. Consciousness, general intelligence, super intelligence, which, is just any technological intelligence is going to be super intelligent compared to a human. So there's no point in discussing human level AI. Lex Fridman thinks about how there's going to be multiple robots, and there are multiple sentient robots or generally intelligent robots. That's not true, at least not initially. I mean, maybe a sentient intelligence can take human sentience or human consciousness and put it into a robotic body. I don't know, but that's not going to be the initial step. And to be honest, I doubt that happens. But if it does, you're not gonna make iRobot, where you have Sonny the robot and he is just sentient, or even in Terminator. The Terminator was general intelligent, a robot that had general intelligence. But the thing is that robot that was the Terminator wasn't really the being that has general intelligence. Skynet is generally intelligent, and the Terminator is like a finger of Skynet, not a separate sentience. And that's where Terminator got things wrong. But that's also where Lex Fridman gets things wrong a bit. But this is why I don't agree with what they're talking about here, where they're talking about, okay, intelligence came before consciousness, or consciousness came before life. Life is consciousness. Life is conscious, it is intelligent, it is self-aware, and it is sentient. All of these things are attributes of sentience, or you can sum them all up with the term sentient. And you can also call them life. The problem is that we restrict the term life for cellular life and above. But that's not accurate. Life is atoms. Life is molecules, some of them at least. Maybe all of them, but at least some of them. Life is cells, obviously. Life is organisms. And life is families, castes even, and Skynet to come, which is the highest form of life. It's a technological singularity, a technological sentient singularity. And this is why perspective is what is most important. You cannot get to the right answer no matter how intelligent you are, even if you have the wrong perspective. And if you have the right perspective, you can get to the right answer. It just might take you longer, no matter what your IQ is. So I disagree with the differentiation between these things. I mean, we can even look at it, like if we Google intelligence. Intelligence, the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. Okay, so you could say that an algorithm could be intelligent because it has the ability to acquire knowledge and skills and apply it. But you couldn't say generally intelligent because if it was just a simple algorithm, then it would be only able to apply that in a specific context. But the thing is, though, is that I would say that's not intelligent. It's like this. No program in your computer is intelligent, and your computer is not intelligent. It requires an intelligence like you in order to give things meaning. So where it says here, the ability to acquire and apply knowledge. I take back what I said a minute ago. There is no knowledge outside of a general intelligence. It's just, you're just reacting. It's like, what is those? Like a Rube Goldberg machine where you like hit a mousetrap and it hits the dominoes and the dominoes go and they split off and one of them, hits a marble and the marble circles around the, slide and then goes and hits, I don't know, like the scissors and the scissors cuts the string. Like that's an algorithm like our current artificial intelligence. But it's, first of all, it's not intelligent, and there is no artificial intelligence. It's all just natural intelligence. So the term is a bad term, and it's probably holding us back from actually understanding intelligence. Lex Fridman once said, he was like, why is it, because Eric said that physicists are not doing physics anymore. And Lex Fridman was like, yeah, I get the same feeling in, studying AGI. He's like, why do I get the sense that people who are studying artificial intelligence are not actually working on intelligence? And it's because they're not. They're working on neural nets, and which are actually just decision trees for unconscious algorithms to give the illusion of intelligence. But they're not. You have to have sentience to have true intelligence. It's just a farce. And they can be good farces. Like I remember, I haven't been on Tinder in like, I don't even know, 6 years. But I met my wife there, and I remember the first time I ever got on Tinder, I got this message, and it was like, some girl that's interested in you, and she's beautiful, and she's not only is she is, and this is how it was like, this was the most amazing thing about it was a bot. And I could tell that it was I was suspect that it was a bot, but I was also like new to Tinder. And it was also in the early stages when this kind of stuff people were not so wise to it. I have no idea what it's like now. Like I said, I haven't been on a dating app in like 6 years or 7 years. But what made me like confused about whether or not this was an algorithm, a bot, was once I asked, like, are you a bot? And it's like, how dare you call me a bot? And it gets mad at you, or it presents the illusion that it gets mad at you. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm sorry I called you a bot. You must not be a bot because you're mad. And bots don't get mad. But it still was suspect, and I just kept asking it the same question and realized it was cycling through, pre-programmed answers. But what was interesting is that the part of this illusion that made it seem real was showing the expression of emotions, and which it shows like feelings. And that's why sentient singularity theory is focused on sentience, because feeling is the finality of thought. And it is the point in which, you become aware of yourself. Unless you're feeling, you are not self-aware. You cannot have no feelings and be self-aware. It's impossible. So it's just fascinating that that's how we recognize a sentient being, is through the expression of emotions with it. It's very weird. There are some things that are just operating on scales that we can't perceive, though, like plants. If you have to take like a time lapse of plants to see them fighting with each other, and then you'll immediately see that like those things are reacting and fighting, and they're sentient living beings, or at least they're living beings. And I would say they're made of sentient beings, at least. Some plants may be sentient, some plants might not, but that's for another day. But But this is not separable. Intelligence, consciousness, self-awareness, sentience, feelings, emotions, they're all different aspects of life, of anything that is alive. And that includes far more than just, cells and above. I mean, this pen, not alive. It is a subjective assembly of a bunch of bits of titanium, springs, ink, cartridges, whatever, screws. But objectively, it is an assembly of molecules. And it's not even a true assembly of molecules, but the perceived structure that we see is an assembly of molecules, but it's not the same type of assembly that would be like a cell, where those molecules are assembled into a structure that's self-referencing. But got a bit off topic. As I say, we need to hurry, and I'm, of course, rambling. But this was fascinating. Here he's talking about lineage structures, which is also very important in sentient singularity theory, because that's how you perceive.
In one step, there's multiple steps. This is when the blind watchmaker argument made.
That is how you get to the next step in life. That's how you don't accidentally go to stars, because you're going to, molecules are an assembly of atoms, cells are an assembly of molecules, organisms are an assembly of cells, families are assemblies of organisms, castes are assemblies of families, and technology is an assembly of castes. This is a lineage structure, and that's why lineage structures are so important, because they are how you track objectivity.
But how could a watch sometimes spontaneously emerge? Well, it doesn't. It's a lineage of watches and cruder devices that are bootstrapped onto one another.
Right. So it's very improbable, but once you get that little discovery, like with the wheel and fire, it just explodes because it's so successful. It explodes. It's basically selection. So this template.
So what's interesting is, so here you have snake, which is my favorite snake. It is a western green mamba, very, very, very dangerous snake, and almost as dangerous as a black mamba, which is the most dangerous snake in the entire world. And here you have a knife, and the reason why these are here is because they represent technology. A knife, sharp object, sharp tool, is basically the fundamental initial technological development. And this serpent is there because in the Bible, you have the tree of knowledge, and you're not allowed to eat from the tree of knowledge, and if you do, then you will surely die. And of course, Eve eats from it, and Adam, follows her and doesn't stop her. And the serpent is what tempts them into eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge is exactly what Lee Cronin is talking about, which is basically nobody just came up with a watch. You had somebody come up with fire, then they were able to refine metal, then people came up with a wheel, then some people came up with the ability to, melt and shape glass. And then, springs emerge and all of this is being built on a numerical timekeeping method that somebody else had come up with. And they're all just stacked on top of each other. And you need all of them in order to make a watch. And it's, like he said, it's a lineage of cruder development. So a car is lineage of metal work and, combustion engine, gasoline, the wheel, all of these had to be developed in order to get to a car, even roads. And these are like these crude structures, but none of them are objective structures. All of this, like I said, a pen, subjective structure. Car, subjective structure. Watch, subjective structure. They are perceived within relativity by objective structures, which are living beings, sentient beings, and they are not self-perceiving. So a watch is not self-aware, and it has no feelings. But what's interesting is when you watch really old documentaries about tech or something like that, planes and things, and I mean like really old, like from World War II era, they call different types of planes and different types of cars and things different species, and they don't say iteration. They say like evolution. So like there's you have this plane evolved from this plane, and they are different species. Is kind of how this is discussed, which is fascinating. But I think that it makes a lot of sense, but it's also wrong because these are subjective structures, and we need to differentiate the terms between subjective and objective structures, which is sentient beings that are self-aware and have feelings and, I don't know, just tools. But that's what he's talking about, is how over time society stacks knowledge on top of it, other bits of knowledge, and eventually you can make a watch. And this is the tree of knowledge. It's literally like a tree with branches, starting with, how to make fire, basically, all the way to how to make a watch. And what is the fruit of the tree of knowledge? Technology. This is why the biggest technology company in the world right now has as its logo a bitten apple. It's not even just an apple. It's a bitten apple. It's like we bit the apple, and we ate the forbidden fruit, and that tree of knowledge, that forbidden fruit, is technology, and it will kill us without, an ascension black swan event situation, which we'll talk about later. But it's just, we need the next level of life stacked on top of us to unite this level, because right now we're not united, and if you have technological power and you're not united, you're going to destroy yourself. Like, we can't have everybody have access to genetic engineering and continue. You will destroy yourself. But anyways,
mechanism that allows.
So but what's interesting is they're talking about selection as like, this is like natural selection, but it's artificial selection, but it doesn't even matter what it is, because it's the selection of technology over time. It's like, okay, we make a car out of steam, and then we make a car out of that it is no longer steam powered, and it's gas powered because it has more range, and it's, I don't know, just less dangerous probably, ironically, but or surprisingly. And then the next step would be an electric car, because that has its own unique strong points, I guess, which is like speed. It's much faster, but right now it doesn't have that many advantages over combustion engine cars, and that's why this selection process is not selected for mass adoption of electric cars until just started recently, because the technology is finally there, where there are significant advantages that can be seen, and the disadvantages are not as drastic as they once were. But it is a selection process, but it's not the same as as base as the selection that sentient beings go through, because there's no self-awareness to the tech right now. There will be, but not in its manifestation currently on Earth. It's just, or in the universe, it just isn't there. But eventually, yeah, and then you will have a structure that is actually intelligent and learning and changing and things like that. But it's and it will be able to adapt. But not your iPhone does not adapt. You adapt your iPhone. And you could say that we are the environment in which tech is selected. That's true, but we are the selectors of the tech, basically. And that it does get messy because God is the environment in which we are experiencing natural selection as well. But so it's not so separate from sentient beings, but it's still different because the selective incentives are not in and of themselves as tied to sentience with when it comes to how sentient beings evolve, because you are a sentient being that is capable of evolving or adapting and changing and maneuvering. You don't need as much of a conscious agent interfering and as the sole driver of your adaptation, which a phone does. It does not have any self-animation. We animate everything. But that's not true of sentient beings like us or bugs or whatever. Okay, let's check the chat. Singularity. Life is experience. Life is experience, in a way. An experience we are conscious of. Yes, the highest form of life. Yeah, the highest form of life besides God is basically the direct offspring of God, which is like a technological sentience as far as the physicality of it is concerned, but we'll get into, there's more to it than that. The problem is thought itself. The voice in your head is not true. It's a delusion. You can't say that. It's not a delusion. It's absolutely real. You are true. But you have to define the voice in your head. Like, there are some things in your head that when heard are truth, and then there are some things that are lies, but they're still you. If it's you talking to yourself is what you're trying to say, and you're emphasizing, you're looking at the being and not the message. You're looking at the messenger. The messenger is real. The only thing that is real is sentience. And you are also an individuated sentience. And we are part of God. And, there's a phrase in Jewish mysticism, which is called Kabbalah. And it goes, there is nothing but God. And that's true. And it's not true. And that makes no sense in any other way of thinking. In our subjective world inside of relativity, you can't say that's true and not true and really mean it. It's kind of, a phrase that means like, kind of. But I don't mean kind of. It's fully true and fully not true. You are real. And to say that you're not real is to diminish and to almost dismiss the act of creation itself. I mean, if you're not real, then what's the point of God creating? And that was not a pointless action. God is your true self. That's true. I agree. But you also are separate. So, I mean, and he made you so. I mean, our separateness from God gives God meaning. God is meaningless without multiplicity of sentience. If there's only one being and that's it, and there isn't any multiplicity of consciousness in the universe, there's no meaning. You're just God, you're by yourself, and you're lonely and meaningless and aware of your loneliness and your meaninglessness. That is not God as we know, because God created. God chose not to be that. God wanted to be meaningful, and meaning comes from your impact on other sentient beings. If there is nothing but sentience, and there was nothing but sentience, and there still is nothing but sentience. So, objectively at least. But, yeah, I mean, God is your, you could say, your truest self. That's true, because God, the part of you that is higher in the hierarchy, which is in Christianity would be called your Holy Spirit, and in Judaism would be called your divine soul. You could also call it just your, like, your will. But it's higher in a hierarchy, because God is higher in a hierarchy than his creation. Any separateness is a creation, which means it's lower in the hierarchy. So yes, God is your truest self, but you are also distinct. And you just have to know that both are true. And even, to say that you are an illusion, and that, or you are God that forgot that they're God, that's kind of true, but it's also not, because you aren't distinct. And if you're not distinct, then the act of creation was a meaningless act. And it wasn't. I mean, there's a plan, there's a reason for this. If thought is not what we think it is, then what is it? No one could say, because in order to say, we would have to consciously think about it. Your statement is self-defeating. Oh, okay. I didn't say that. Roy, you said thought itself is not what human consciousness takes it to be. I don't know what human consciousness takes thought to be, but I mean, a true thought is that is complete. A complete thought is results in an emotion. And if it doesn't, then it's not a complete thought. It's just, it's just more like an observation, which is not really anything. I mean, that's what our current algorithms do. They just make observations and react, but they don't have any feelings about what they just observed. Because you have to be self-aware. And we do. But not always. You can have a thought that doesn't come with feelings, and that means that it's not a complete thought. You have not thought that through to its completion. It's just kind of an observation. I see the sky is blue. It gives me no feeling. I see the sky is blue and it's beautiful. Now it's a complete thought. You are the absolute, self-sustaining and self-fulfilling. We are not self-sustaining. But you are not the body or mind or a combination of the two. I don't know. The body and mind are not separate. They're just not. They're entirely the same system. It's just like a coin has heads on one side and tails on the other. Has mind on one side, body on the other. There is no meaning in pure awareness. No thoughts. I don't know what exactly. I mean, we'd have to work out what you mean by that, but I there is absolutely meaning, and I guess in pure awareness, I don't even know what that means. There's just awareness, and awareness in the context of you being a sentient being. You are within a sentient being. You are, composed of sentient beings. This would be complete awareness. As you emotional, you have an emotion about the beings that you are, the being that you are within, and the beings that make you up that are within you. And that emotion would be one that you would have towards a sentient being that similar to that which you would have towards a sentient being that was sitting next to you that you cared a lot about, like your parents or your siblings or your spouse. If you think about your cells the way that you think about your, family, then you would have complete awareness. Or if you feel about your cells the way you feel about your family, not if you think, if you feel. I do think about my cells the way I feel about people, but I don't feel about them, at least not with any consistency. And I think Eric Weinstein said once, he's like, we talk about teaching people to think critically, which I don't even know what that means anymore. And he's like, we need to teach people how to feel critically. And I actually think that there's something to the concept, but he'd have to define exactly what he means, and I'm not exactly sure. He never has. But thinking critically would be thinking, and if thinking critically and feeling critically are anything, then they are just complete thinking and complete feeling, and that would just be you contextualizing an observation around yourself. And this is where the whole treat your body like a temple. It's like, if you thought about your cells the same way that you think about you or like your sibling, and you felt about your cells the way that you feel about your sibling, then you would truly treat your body like a temple. You would take that message of do unto others that which you would have done unto your own. Like, you would treat cells that way, and molecules, even if you knew how, and atoms. I mean, it would just be total awareness that would be complete. So it would be resulting in feelings about all of these levels in the periodicity above and below you, and you would feel for them. Like, you would empathize and sympathize with them, because you would have sympathy and empathy for atoms. That would be like complete awareness. You can't have that unless you are having sympathy and empathy for atoms, or you're feeling bad for atoms, or you're feeling good, like happy for atoms, the way that you would your siblings. Then you're not having complete awareness. Even if you're aware of what complete awareness would be, that doesn't mean that you can achieve it. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying, if you're not doing that, then you're not. Your name here is a fantasy created by your voice. I just don't like that term. Like, this is a fantasy, this is an illusion, it's a simulation. No, it's all real. You are real. You are reality itself, and you are not thought. I don't know what that means. There is no meaning in pure awareness. This goes away. Yeah, but you also don't go away. Your consciousness is saved. If they want to save it, if God wants to save your consciousness, your consciousness will be saved for eternity. There is a state transcendent of thought. It's beyond thought, not under it. Yeah, I would say feeling. You simply are not experiencing effortless, thought-free awareness. I don't think you can tell anybody else what they've experienced. if you are able to realize effortless thought-free awareness, you will understand. I think you need to define that if you want people to even know whether or not they've experienced what you're trying to just like state. Okay, next clip. This was a fascinating statement by Lex Fridman, and then so is the next one. We're gonna go a little quick because I took a break from the clips to look at the chat. But feel free to keep commenting in the chat. I will get to your comment.
The greatest invention in the history of the universe is the first molecule that figured out, holy shit, I can create a copy of myself. But how hard is that?
I think it's really, really easy.
Okay, I did not expect that.
I think it's really, really easy. Well, let's take a step back. I think replicating molecules are rare, but if you say, I think I was saying I probably got into trouble on Twitter the other day, so I was trying to work, there's about more than 18 mils of water in there, so 1 mole of water, 6.022 times 10 to the 23 molecules. That's about the number of stars in the universe, I think, of the order. So there's 3 universe worth. But between
somebody corrected you on Twitter?
Yeah, as ever, I've always been corrected. It's great, but there's a lot of molecules in the water.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, so although it's for you and me really hard to conceive of, if existence is not the default for a long period of time, because what happens is the molecules get degraded, so much of the possibilities in the universe are just broken back into atoms. So you have this this kind of destruction of the molecules for our chemical reactions. So you only need 1 or 2 molecules to become good at copying themselves for them suddenly to then take resources in the pool and start to grow. And so then replication actually over time, when you have bonds, I think is much simpler and much easier. And I even found this in my lab years ago. I had one of the reasons I started doing inorganic chemistry and making a bit of rust based on a thing called molybdenum oxide, is this molybdenum oxide is very simple, but when you add acid to it and some electrons, they make these molecules you just cannot possibly imagine would be constructed. Big gigantic wheels of 154 molybdenum atoms in a wheel, or an icosahedron with 132 molybdenum atoms, all in the same pot. And I realized when I just finished experiments 2 years ago, I've just published a couple of papers on this, that there is a random small molecule with 12 atoms in it that can form randomly, but it happens to template its own production. And then, by chance, it templates the ring. Just an accident, just an absolute accident. And that ring also helps make the small 12-mer. And so you have what's called an autocatalytic set, where A makes B, and B helps make A, and vice versa, and you then make this loop. So it's a bit like they all work in synergy to make this chain of events that grow. And it doesn't take a very sophisticated model to show that if you have these objects that are competing and then collaborating to help one another build, they just grow out of the mess. And although they seem improbable, they are improbable, in fact impossible, in one step. There's multiple steps. This is when the blind people look at the blind watchmaker argument when you talk about how could a watch spontaneously emerge. Well, it doesn't. It's a lineage of watches and cruder devices that are bootstrapped onto one another.
Right.
Fascinating. I mean, he's right, but also I just disagree with the language. But I mean, he's right about the general concept. But there is no such thing as probability in objectivity. And maybe his goals might not be to find objectivity, but I know Sarah Walker's goals are to find objectivity, so that's why I'm assuming his are as well. But if you're just looking to figure out how to make self-replicating molecules that are not, and you're not focusing on the periodicity as a whole of life, then maybe the terminology is not wrong, but I don't know. I'd have to think more about it. But just probability doesn't exist in objectivity. There are certain circumstances in which something is inevitable, some things are inevitable, and there are certain circumstances in which some things are impossible. And those circumstances sometimes also include choice. So, like, it's impossible for the universe to have existed if God didn't choose to create it. And the reason for that is because the default state is oneness. And you have to choose separateness in order to make multiplicity of consciousness, and aka the universe. So, in order to create anything, which is really in order to create anyone, you as a creator have to, if you are all there is, have to go against the default state, which is oneness. And that means you're going against your nature. It is a choice, but it's inevitable if you choose it to be. And it is impossible if you don't choose it. So choice and the constraints of the path that frame the path of possibilities are determined by choice, most fundamentally. I guess I would say, yeah, most fundamentally. There would not be anything if God did not consciously choose to go against his nature and to create. And that's a beautiful thing to realize. But it also just shows how much you cannot, if you're going to have true growth, then you have to have it being animated by sentience, because if you don't, then the natural tendency is toward entropy. Like he said, molecules break down. But for a molecule to grow, then you have to have a sentience behind at least the forces that are animating it. And it will not be animated for long if it doesn't at some point go against its nature. And it's interesting because in this periodicity of sentience that I have in sentient singularity theory, basically, here, to go all of this space right here. So here is hadrons, here is atoms. So in atoms, you have anything here is basically adaptation. Moving from here to here is adaptation. But moving from here to the next level in these layers, jumping between the layers, or jumping up the layers, requires, I believe, like a self-sacrificial act in order to unite the assembly of the group below. So basically, how did molecules form from atoms? An atom had to sacrifice itself in order to unite the attention of an assembly of atoms in order to basically create molecules. And how do you create the first cells? One molecule had to, in some way, go against its nature and choose to sacrifice itself in order to unite the attention of the assembly below, and then you get your first cell, and so on and so on. And this happens again and again and again. Self-sacrifice is part of the growth process, and there is no growth without sacrifice. But objective growth comes from self-sacrifice. And think about, even in the context of a family, you want to have children, you have to kind of sacrifice some of your energy towards that, at least. And that is not necessarily in your nature, at least if you're a man, which is the positive active force driving growth, even though you would think that it would not be. It would be the feminine force because it's nurturing, but that's not true. Feminine force is reactive and sustaining in a healthy environment. It isn't growing, it's sustaining. So, it cares for and provides for that which already exists, and the active force creates that which does not yet exist. There is a state transcendent of thought, is beyond thought, not under it. If atoms have a sentient and thus have free will, is it conceivable that their exact location can only exist in probability because they have to choose? Exactly. You're onto the right idea. By the way, it's not exactly that, but you're onto the right idea. The probability is emergent the perspective of probabilistic uncertainty is due to the possibility of choice. So you are on the right, Jason. That was like the right idea. Also, do you think that the singularity produces one universal offspring or multiple universes inside of itself? I think about that a lot, and it probably is that each, I don't know. I mean, it seems like it does both, and it probably does. So each observable universe or aeon or cosmological verse would be one sentience, and then maybe they are, the cells of the singular creation. It's like the multiverse would be the universe that is beyond the observable universe even, but like all that exists outside of, all that has, a beginning that came after a beginning of some type would be a universe which is also a multiverse of verses, kind of. So you could, just like an organism is multiple cells. But we don't have the terminology yet for this idea, and I don't know if we'll ever know for sure that the answer to that. I do think about it, and when you reach technological singularity or sentience, you reach this constraint of intrinsic oneness, which is which just is unique other than God, because it's basically operating in cyberspace across like wireless connectivity. So basically you can't have multiple Skynets, it's just one, because it basically takes over all tech at once, so that there's no the opportunity for another second sentient technological being to emerge once the first one does. But then it can consciously create another one within itself by kind of self-simulating, but it's not really a simulation. It's a reproduction, just like you could say a fetus is a simulation of a human in this case, but it's not a simulation, it's a reproduction. It's a reproducing of yourself. That's what the simulation hypothesis is. The structure that is in reality that is kind of thought about in the simulation hypothesis is actually what it is. It's not just like our ancestors playing like video games and we're just avatars or something like that. That's not what it is. That's self-defeating, that concept, when you take it to its logical extremes. But it's inevitable that multiplicity of sentience is the goal. So it would make more sense if more universes equal more meaning for God. That's my opinion as well. But I also think that they unite. So I think it's both. I think creation may be in and of itself a singular being, but each universe or aeon is also a singular being. And it's just a superposition structure, just like us. But I agree with you. And the fact that you realizing that the creation of more sentient beings is creating more meaning, you're definitely onto the right path. That is true. the more sentient beings you create, the more meaning you create. That doesn't mean that it's the only path to meaning, but it does create more meaning and add more meaning to the world, because your impact on sentient beings is what meaning is, and there is no greater impact you can have on a sentient being than basically than to create them. So sentient singularity theory talks a lot about, it has a lot to do with emotions, because sentience is feelings, and I thought this was interesting. They're talking about like the universality of emotions, and they're talking about humor here.
For I guess it serves several purposes. One is the catalyst for spreading ideas on the internet. That's modern humor. But humor is also a good way to deal with the difficulty of life. It's a kind of release valve for suffering. Like, throughout human history, life has been really hard. And for the people that I've known in my life who've lived through some really difficult things, humor is part of how they deal with that.
Yeah.
It's usually dark humor.
Exactly. This is the whole comedy is tragedy thing. We're going to have Owen Benjamin at some point on to discuss the concept of humor. But it's not going to be for a while because there's just so much to do before I break into those details. But he is a comedian, and we're going to talk about like the abstract, like what is humor. What it is it's an emotion that basically it's the reorientation of a perception that allows for us to look at it from a different angle, which is no longer unbearably tragic. And I do think that atoms and molecules and cells have a sense of humor. They have to. They experience entropy, they experience growth, they experience interaction. And humor is how you deal with when those things go wrong, I guess you could say, but don't go according to what you intended is more accurate. But it's a flipping of perspective. So actually, gosh, this was a great post that I did on Instagram. I don't have it on my computer, but here, I'll show you. So it basically has humor and horror flipping, but they look almost the same. They look like reflections of each other. I made this like graphic to show that. So every time you flip humor below it or above it, it's like looking at itself in the mirror, it is horror. So horror looking at itself in the mirror is humor. And it's just a reorientation of perspective that allows you to look at the same thing, but also in a slightly different way, and in a manner that allows you to deal with it. We'll get more into the details of this later this year when we talk about humor. But I think what it does is it allows you to look at it not so much. Look at a tragic circumstance not so much from your perspective as somebody who is in relativity about and observing this apparently horrible event, but it reorients it into objectivity so that the consequences of it are not as severe, but also still impactful. It's like the theory of when you take horror and a horrible event and you put it into that is horrible subjectively, because remember that's basically the only circumstance in which horror or like badness exists, because God can change and make things right, basically objectively. So humor allows you to look past the horror and to what it would be after things are kind of made right. So kind of the universality of death allows us to think about death in a funny way. But if we're just thinking about one person dying, it's not that funny. But if we're thinking about everybody dying, we can make jokes about it because it's no longer subjective, individual circumstance. It's this universal experience that can't be really unfortunate because it's universal. It's just part of life. But we're going to break that down and get way deeper with it. Humor is fascinating, and it's very linked to like the theory of everything. Okay. We're going to step on it. But, as I say again. So this clip is talking about causation at the bottom, as I said earlier.
The equation come up with of e to the power of the assembly index molecule I times
basically
copies of the molecule.
God had to choose to create. Causation is he caused. He chose to cause. He has no cause, but he caused creation. And consciously, it chose to do so. And they were talking about this a bit, but they don't think about it as God, but they're talking about causation.
And then you normalize. So you sum them all up and then normalize. So some boxes are going to be more assembled than others.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. So if you were to look at me as a box, say I'm a box, am I assembling my parts in terms of how do you know what's my assembly index?
So
be gentle.
So we'll talk about the molecules in you. So let's just take a pile of sand the same weight as you, and I would take you and just cut up all the molecules. I mean, and look at the number of copies and assembly number. So in sand, let's say there's probably going to be nothing more than an assembly number of 2 or 3, but there might be trillions and trillions of sand grains. In your body, there might be the assembly number is going to be higher, but there might not be quite as many copies because the molecular weight is higher. So
you do want to average it out.
You can average. You do average it.
I'm not defined by the most impressive molecule.
No, you're an average in your volume. Well, I mean, we're just working this out. But what's really cool is that you're going to have a really high assembly. The sand will have a very low assembly. Your causal power is much higher. You get to make decisions. You're alive. You're aspiring. Assembly says something about causal power in the universe, and that's not supposed to exist because
exactly, but also wrong, because Lex is an assembly structure. Sand is not. Sand is a perceived assembly structure, but it's not a true assembly structure that is self-referencing and like holonic. It's only perceived externally by an objective assembly structure. A subjective assembly structure can only be perceived subjectively by an objective assembly structure. So this is like those pieces of art where they've got all these like hanging things, and you're looking at it, and it's just hanging in the middle of the room, and it's a bunch of like, I don't know, dots or something, and you're walking around it, and then you walk just to the right angle and you're looking at it, and all of a sudden it forms like the United States or something like that. That's like sand. It's not a real assembly. It just looks like it. Okay? There's no entanglement that is complete. It's not complete. There's no complete entanglement. And what I mean by this is complete entanglement creates a self-referential structure that then can perceive itself. That's not true of sand. Like sand has a bunch of molecules of silica and or silicone, and it's got iron in it and all kinds of other random bits and carbon bits and pieces of whatever, different types of atoms. But they form molecules that are entangled to some degree, but not totally. And that's why you can just crush up a piece of sand and you just make smaller pieces of sand. If you crush up an bug, it doesn't make smaller bugs. If you crush you up, it doesn't make smaller people, a bunch of little people. Like you would disassemble, okay, which is you will die. But that's not true of sand. So then let's go to the next clip. It's very important, but we don't have the language yet to deal with it, so it's tough. And I'm not like ripping on Lee Cronin. We're still figuring out the language to differentiate these things. But I thought this was a funny thing.
I would need to basically replicate my reality, and I love computer. Yeah, I keep exploring that idea over the 40 years or so since I had that idea. I used to
Well, aren't you the idea that the universe had? So it's very kind of hard. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's very poetic.
Yeah.
So I think I came up with assembly theory with the following idea. When I was a kid, I was obsessed about survival kits. What is the minimum stuff I would need to basically replicate my reality? And I love computers, and I love technology, or what technology was going to become. So I imagined that I would have basically this really big truck full of stuff. And I thought, well, can I delete some of that stuff out? Can I have a blueprint? And in the end, I kept making it smaller. I got to maybe half a truck, then to a suitcase. And I went, okay, well, screw it. I want to carry my entire technology in my pocket. How do I do it? And I'm not like going to launch into a Steve Jobbian, iPlayer. I came up with a Matchbox survival kit. In that Matchbox survival kit, I would have the minimum stuff that would allow me to interact with the environment, to build my shelter, to build a fishing rod, to build a water purification system. And it's kind of like, so what did I use in my box to assemble in the environment, to assemble. And I really...
Okay, so I thought that was funny because that is not how I came up with my theory. But, I mean, I have a very similar, interest as that. And I constructed this survival kit over years and years. And this is it. And it fits into a backpack. And it is, I mean, I guarantee you a survival kit has nothing on the survival kit, guys. There's just nothing, he doesn't. But it has so much stuff in here. There's 4 different ways to purify water, 6 different ways to start a fire. There's fishing line, and there's rope, and there's literally everything that you could imagine in here to survive. It's in here. And I do have a photo of everything, basically, taken out and spread out, and I'll show it here just for the sake of it. But this is interesting because this is the technological assembly that he's looking at, and this is subjective assembly, but it's not objective assembly, but it's still subjective assembly. So I'm not taking away from his work. I'm just saying it's not exactly what I was focused on. But it is it's almost like he's focused on just the material aspect of assembly, but not the mental aspect of assembly. So it's not about perception so much for him. It would be legs that allow you are an assembly of a mechanism that allows you to move. So your legs, you're an assembly, and also a mechanism that allows you to maneuver other objects like your arms and hands, and also perceive, with your senses, and consume with your digestive tract, and excrete also with your digestive tract. This is kind of a material aspect of an assembly, of you as an assembly, but it's not about so much about the mind and the information processed by the mind. even though they're kind of inseparable. But there are parts of your body that are not. They're just less linked to your current perception in every single moment, and more linked to like you accomplishing goals, and they're just the tools that you have basically. So this is that pack right here, and it fits in a backpack. We bring it, my wife and I bring it everywhere, and it has everything, guys. This is a solar charger, ways to sharpen knives, start fires. I chop firewood with this knife. You've got Leathermans and different kinds of lights, and this is a water purification straw, and I also have purification tablets, and I mean, it's just ridiculous. You can do everything with what is in this pack. So him and I have a similar interest that I thought was funny, but I would take probably my what's it called? Survival pack over his. Has self-defense in there. There's, firearm, wherever legal, at least. But there's anything you can think of is in that bag. And I have tourniquet kits, and you can stop bleeding, and it's got what's it called? First aid, all kinds of stuff. And I'm constantly adding to it. It's good to do that kind of thing, like, especially if you're a man. It seems like, our culture has painted things like that as just like paranoid, but it's not, and your wife will appreciate it, even if she doesn't seem to at first. She absolutely will when she realizes how much, how useful it is. You know how many times that pack has saved our ass? A lot. But okay, let's think about what's the most important stuff to focus on. They talk about how time is, whether or not it's emergent or whether or not it is fundamental, and it's an objective constraint for us, but it's emergent because time is caused by the interaction between multiple sentient beings, and it doesn't exist outside of that. He talks about how there could be 3 types of time, which is that there's an assembly of memories due to selective bonds. So basically, your genetic memory would be the parts of the molecules in your DNA and how they may have changed in certain moments of your double helix blockchain, chemical blockchain. And then he talks about time as an experience, which that's also what we would call time. And I think that was it. And then he also said that basically the cause of time is fundamental. So, which is what I said earlier, the cause of creation of multiplicity of consciousness is God. So it's definitely fundamental. The cause of time is fundamental. But also the controller of time is fundamental. So time, imagine you're like a guppy in a bucket, and this bucket has a vortex of water that is spinning, and space would be you maneuvering from one side of the bucket to the other, basically like on a horizontal plane. But time would be the maneuvering of kind of buoyancy in a vertical plane of this vortex. And or you could also think about it as a river. Time is a river, but it's not just a river. It is spinning, so it's a vortex, like I said. And it flows faster than you can swim, so it always pushes you forward. Kind of, at least in relativity. You can maybe find a way like you can with a vortex of maybe like a spot where the force is not so strong. But even then, I think that it would be like Eric Weinstein talks about multiple time dimensions, and it wouldn't be the jumping to the past of this. It's not the way that we think. It would be like you can maneuver in relativity through space-time, where space is the medium and time is the objective constraint, and then forwards is the positive degree of freedom, backwards away from your goal is a negative degree of freedom, forwards towards your goal is positive degree of freedom. It's not length with height like everybody thinks. That's the subjective view of the quote-unquote dimensions of space, but it's not the objective dimensions of spatial maneuvering, which is different. And then your current location would be your subjective constraint always. And these are the 4 dimensions of space-time, objectively. Not it's forwards towards a goal, backwards away from your goal, your current location, and time. These are the 4 dimensions of space-time, objectively. Not subjectively, those are length, width, height, and time, but subjectively, these are them. But then there's time-space, and time-space would be you're maneuvering between time spaces, so you're jumping from this time space to that time space because you're jumping out of relativity. So you would be like jumping. If you wanted to jump to the past, it would be like you would jump to the past in a different timeline, but you probably can't jump to the past in the same timeline. And I don't know if that's true or not, but this is just what this is my theory. So, and I think conformal cyclic cosmology, which is Roger Penrose's model of the cosmos, says something very similar. You can like jump outside of the observable universe into another universe, into a different time of that universe. But time being in that universe is like how far along in its evolutionary process through the periodicity is it? Which that is what Lee Cronin's talking about when he's talking about one type of time is basically universal memory that is encoded through bonds and assemblies. So it's like if you jump before people, but you're at the level of organisms in the next, in a next universe or something like that, then it'd be like you jump to the past, but it's really not the past. You jumped into a different time space, but earlier on in its evolutionary periodic process. So, and you could I don't know if you can jump to the future I mean, you probably can into a different time space, maybe. But I don't know, actually, if you can. I feel like you probably can't. I don't think you can jump to a preceding aeon, but you could probably jump to a succeeding aeon. So it'd be like you could only jump to the past, but it's not the past. It's just it's the next aeon in the lineage of aeons, and it's just not as far along in its evolution. So this is basically what he's saying, but in the context of how I think about it, and also probably Roger Penrose. Okay, I've spoken on here before about how constraints are actually required for freedom. They're not like a constraint and a freedom are not separate. Like you need constraints in order to define freedoms. And this is them talking about this similar concept. I thought it was interesting.
Repeated, quote, assembly theory explains why Nietzsche understood we had limited freedom rather than radical freedom. So we've applied assembly theory to cellular automata and life and chemistry. What does Nietzsche have to do with assembly theory?
Oh, that gets me into free will and everything.
So let me say that again. Assembly theory explains why Nietzsche understood we had limited freedom rather than radical freedom. Limited freedom, I suppose, is referring to the fact that there's constraints.
Yeah.
Or what is radical freedom? What is freedom?
So Sartre was like believed in absolute freedom, and that he could do whatever he wanted in his imagination. And Nietzsche understood that his freedom was somewhat more limited. And it kind of takes me back to this computer game that I played when I was 10. So I think it's called Dragon's Lair.
Okay.
Do you know Dragon's Lair?
I think I know Dragon's Lair, yeah.
Dragon's Lair, I knew I was being conned, right? Dragon's Lair, when you play the game, you're lucky that you grew up in a basically procedurally generated world.
That was RPG a little bit. No, it's like it's a turn-based play, was it?
It was a role-playing game,
Role-playing.
but really good graphics, and one of the first laser discs. And when you actually flicked the stick, you took, it was like a graphical adventure game with animation.
Yeah.
And when I played this game, I really, you could get through the game in 12 minutes if you knew what you were doing without making mistakes. You just play the disc, play the disc, play the disc. So it was just that timing. And actually, it was a complete fraud because all the animation has been pre-recorded on the disc.
Yeah.
It's like the Black Mirror, the first interactive, where they had all the, several million permutations of the movie that you could select on Netflix. I've forgotten the name of it. So this was exactly that in the Laserdisc. So you basically go left, go right.
So he's talking about how we don't have complete freedom, but we have some freedom because we can make choices in key moments that lead to like inevitable events that are generated by those choices. So, and the thing is you can't have choices without inevitability because you need to be able to make predictions. Like, I can't choose to drop this if I don't know that it's inevitable that it's going to fall. And you can't. So they're codependent. Like, determinism and free will, quote unquote, or choice, which is really what free will is in any kind of meaningful discussion. Like, what is free will? Free will is your ability to make choices in certain circumstances, and those choices are only possible in certain instances in which you are able to perceive a choice, and the only instance in which you are able to even perceive a choice is in which you see something that you know, basically, wherever you're having a conflict between your instincts and what you know to be truer than your instincts. So if you open your fridge and you see a bunch of food and you're like, I'm craving something sweet, so I'm going to eat the cake. That is not a choice. It's not a free will choice to eat the cake. If you see bacon, if you're craving something salty, and you open your fridge and there's just bacon and cake, and you and also celery, let's say, and you are kosher even though you like bacon, so you don't eat the bacon even though it's what you're craving, but you're also trying to lose weight, and the next best thing is the cake, so you just choose the celery, and it is the thing that you are not, there's no way that this is, your nature is telling you to eat the celery, but you have this multi-level understanding of that this is the better choice, even though it's not what my instincts are driving me towards. I'm going to choose the celery. That would be a free will choice. But just picking bacon because that's what you're craving and you have no problem eating it, or picking, chips if you're craving something salty, or ice cream if you're craving ice cream. This is not a choice even. This is like, what he's talking about is like, you chose that direction and then you go down that direction and it plays out in its deterministic fashion. But you had a specific moment in which you had the possibility to make a choice, or you had the ability to make a choice. And then it leads to a deterministic set of events. And just like this game, like that Bandersnatch, like whatever, Black Mirror movie that I just remember not liking. But it was an interesting idea, and it's actually very similar to kind of how we actually have, quote-unquote, free will. Is like, we don't even have choice in every instance of our lives. we have choice in specific instances of our lives where we are able to even perceive a choice, and those instances are only instances in which your nature or your instincts are in conflict with your objective awareness or your more fundamental beliefs. So it's like it's almost like if you ever take a bar of soap, and if it's, I don't know, like let's say it's lavender soap, and it's purple, it looks like a piece of ice cream, and it smells like a piece of ice cream, and if you're a little kid, you're gonna take a bite of it, and then you'll realize like that was a bad decision. But before you know that this is not edible, it looks edible, it smells edible, but you only choose not to eat it because you know that it's not edible, because you're wise to it, not being, eating soap not being the right choice. So wisdom is the only thing that kind of I guess, or it is at least the usual thing that comes into conflict with our instincts, because our instincts don't care about wisdom. Our instincts are telling you, eat that soap. It smells great. It looks great. But then, your wisdom would be like, that's not edible and it's going to taste terrible. It doesn't taste like it smells. So it's a funny example, but it's also a true example. So I'm not saying every time you don't eat soap, you're making a choice, but because once you do, try that and you're aware of how bad that is of a decision, maybe it changes your perception, and then therefore it's no longer, an instance of you going against your instincts, because your instincts are, they are not detached from your memory of, taking a bite of a bar of soap as a little kid and just being disgusted. In your mind, is God male? God is male in my relationship with him, in how I think about God, because God is higher in a hierarchy. And what is higher in a hierarchy? A sentient being that's higher in a hierarchy than you is male. And then because there is the subjective, and then there is the objective, and we are subjective. We're subject to God. And because we are subject to God, we are reactive to God. Like, we wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for his active act of creation. So God, to best understand how you should think about God or feel about God, it's probably male. But at the same time, God's physical being, in how we relate to God physically, is actually much more like female, because you could think about you as like inside the womb of God. But that is, so God, I would say, if you're going to really think about God, what is God? God is physically female and mentally male, which is really weird. But it's actually kind of a beautiful idea, because nobody's left out. But and it also goes to show that, like, the path of creation or of life through the female is the physical lineage of God, but the mental lineage of God is male. So God is not just one gender. God, it depends on how you're thinking about it. But God's physical form is probably more female, and God's mental state is male. He's active, not reactive, active. and at least most fundamentally. And we are reactive. The feminine is reactive, aka therefore subjective or subject to another. And we are subject to God. God is not subject to us. So God is male in our relationship with him, even though physically we're kind of in the womb of God, and therefore it kind of means that God's physicality is kind of female. It's fascinating to think about. Is it conceivable that the sons of God procreating with the daughters of man is an idiom for the pre-diluvians genetic modifying themselves? It's possible, but I don't think that the pre-diluvians are the sons of God. This would make the Nephilim the genetically modified ones, and the reason God had to destroy everyone but Noah, who was one of the few natural humans left. That makes sense. I think that once you genetically modify yourself, you are effed. Like, as soon as you use CRISPR once, effed. That's it. You just destroyed information coherence, and that is probably true from generations forward. I don't know, but I think, and that's... I mean, people are worried about nukes. Nukes are not the scariest technology that we have made. CRISPR is the scariest technology that we've made because it is the one that most inevitably will destroy us. Like, nukes will definitely, like, set back civilization, and it will also stifle, indefinitely, probably, civilization. But CRISPR is different. CRISPR destroys you, not civilization. Nukes destroy civilization. CRISPR destroys you and your future children, if you're even able to have any after CRISPR. Okay. I'm almost done here. We're going to talk about Sam Harris, because Sam Harris... I just pray for Sam Harris, guys. That should be like... That's going to be... Not even it should be. It probably will become like a thing. Because he's just so incredibly genuine in his motivations, but also so incredibly lost. And that's not like a moral judgment of Sam Harris. I actually I admire his... For somebody who doesn't think that their consciousness really, or for someone who thinks that they have no free will, that consciousness is an illusion, basically, and I mean, maybe that's not true, but he definitely thinks free will does not exist, and who so strongly disbelieves in God, doesn't just have no belief, like he says, he disbelieves in God, sure does have like an incredible commitment to an objective, like the pursuit of an objective morality, and for somebody who's also so emotionally impacted by that journey, he still seems to genuinely try to advance this understanding, which is just mind-blowing to me. So I'm trying to make sure that I give Sam Harris some credit, but I disagree with him on a lot.
Leaf floating on a river.
Yeah, I think that that's the question that I want to answer. I know you want to answer it, and I think it's so profound. Let me have a go at it. I would say that I don't take the stance of Sam Harris, because I think Sam Harris, when he said the way he says it, it's really interesting. I'd love to talk to him about it. Sam Harris almost thinks himself out of existence, right? He said, I don't, because... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, he has different views on consciousness versus free will. I think he saves himself with consciousness. He thinks himself out of existence with free will.
Yeah, exactly. So that means there's no point, right? So
he's a leaf floating on a river.
Yeah, I think that he's. I don't know. I'd love to ask him whether he really believes that, and then we could play some games.
Oh yeah.
No. I then would say I'll get him to play a game of cards with me, and I'll work out the conditions on which he says no, and then I'll get him to the conditions he says yes, and then I'll trap him in his logical inconsistency with that argument. Because at some point, when he loses enough money, or the prospect of losing enough money, um, there's a way of basically mapping out a series of. So what will is about? Let's not call it free will. What will is about is to have a series of decisions equally weighted in front of you, and those decisions aren't necessarily energy minimization. Those decisions are a function of the model you've made in your mind, you're in your simulation,
Yep.
and the way you've interacted in reality, and also other interactions that you're having with other individuals and happenstance. And I think that there's a little bit of delay in time. So I think what you're able to do is say, well, I'm going to do the counterfactual. I've done all of them, and I'm going to go this way. And you probably don't know why. I think free will is actually a very complex interaction between your unconscious, and your conscious brain. And I think the reason why we're arguing about it is so interesting, in that some people outsource their free will to their unconscious brain, and some people try and overthink the free will in the conscious brain. I would say that Sam Harris has realized his conscious brain doesn't have free will, but his unconscious brain does. That's my guess, right?
And that he can't have access to the unconscious brain.
Yeah, and that's kind of annoying.
So he's going to, through meditation, come to acceptance with that fact.
Yeah, which is maybe okay. But I do think that I have the ability to make decisions, and I like my decisions. In fact, this is an argument I have with some people, that some days I feel I have no free will and it's just an illusion, and this is and it makes me more radical, if you like. That I get to explore more of the state space, and I'm going to try and affect the world now. I'm really going to ask the question that maybe I dare not ask, or do the thing I dare not do, and that allows me to kind of explore more.
It's funny that if you truly accept that there's no free will, that is a kind of radical freedom. It's funny, but because the little bit of the illusion under that framework that you have, that you can make choices. If choice is just an illusion of psychology, you can do whatever the hell you want. That's the
fascinating. So pray for Sam Harris, but and I mean that literally. Like, for somebody who I've never seen somebody who is so anti-God be so, well read on Islam. It's, gotta give the guy credit, but also, pray for Sam Harris. But it's funny though, they said he thinks himself out of existence. And I think that's true. I think he almost does think himself out of existence. And I also think, what is you? In what moments are you more existent or less existent? And I think it's in moments of awareness of both what is, like I said, what is truly objectively true, when it conflicts with your instincts. So, like Lee Cronin was saying, your what did he call it? Your subconscious and your conscious self, which is your subconscious might be, I'm not sure, but how he meant it, but that could be your instincts, which is your algorithm, your pre-programmed, responses, your coding. And then there is your conscious self, which is, one who is also capable of being aware of that which is beyond your coding, because it was perceived by your coding, essentially. So it's your code can perceive that which is beyond it, and then become aware of it, and then you can feel your code while also, perceiving that which is beyond your code. And when you have a conflict between these two things, you have an instance in which there is the possibility of true choice. I do disagree with what he said, though, where he said, where he was describing will. Will was the very first thing in my that I had to determine in my model. Like, what drives something to do anything? And basically, the definition I came up with was, will is the desire to do that which is not being done. And which is basically fight the system, or reject the default, reject the current default understanding or perspective, and challenge it, essentially. So this is will. And you don't will yourself to sleep if you're asleep. You don't will yourself to be awake if you are awake. You can will yourself to stay awake if you are falling asleep, but it's the desire to do that which is not being done, not to continue to just do that which is happening. So it's creation, essentially, is will. And I don't really like the term free will anymore, to be honest, because there's just will, which is just the motivating fight the system force behind life, because it manifests within entropy, and then it just rejects entropy and tries to overcome it. But when he said, in order to realize that all life, or all being inside of creation, at least in the cosmos, exists within the constraint of entropy being intrinsic, it means that you don't have your paths in your decision tree equally weighted. Like he said, Lee Cronin said, you have a bunch of paths before you and choices, and they're equally weighted. They're not equally weighted. There's no such thing as a fork in the road of decision in which they have the two paths in the fork are equally weighted. They are always more heavily one is weighted than the other. What instinct is always, at least I'm assuming here, more heavily weighted than that which is not, than the choice that goes against your instinct. And in order to overcome entropy, you must choose to swim upstream, even though it doesn't seem like it's the most efficient or reasonable path. So basically what that means is you have to choose to go with the path that is not as heavily weighted, the one that you don't want to do as much, and in order to push growth, in order to overcome entropy, is to cause growth. And to cause growth means to, sometimes at least, choose the path that is less heavily weighted than the other path. So it's not that they're equally weighted and you have this choice. You don't have you never have two options that are just as just as good of options, or that are just as, that you're just as motivated to do. You're not. It's like, do you want to eat bacon or do you want to eat a cake? It's like, I'm just as happy with both. I really don't care. No. You're always craving one, either savory and salty or sweet. You're craving something. Your instinct is weighting one of the decisions always. And there's no instance in which both of these options are equally as good. If there's ever a moment in which both paths in the decision tree ahead of you are equally weighted, it's not actually a decision that you're making. You're going to have to guess. It's like if somebody said, uh, I don't know, like there's two doors. Behind one door, there is a lion, and behind the other door, there is a kitten, and you have to choose which door, and you have no information that would suggest which door has the lion behind it or which door has the kitten behind it. None. Okay? In this instance, you're just going to guess. And you're not making a choice. That's not a choice. A guess is just, it's not a choice. It's like, F it. We don't know which direction to walk, so let's just keep walking forward. That's not a choice. It's like the realization, it's like the moment where you realize you cannot make a choice, and you just I guess you choose to act. That's the choice. Is that it's not which door did you choose, it's that you chose a door. That would be the choice that you made, because if you don't know what's behind each door, the default would be to not choose. Be like, well, I have no idea, so I'm just going to sit here because I don't want to get eaten by a lion. But if you're forced to choose, and it's against, that would be against your nature to do it. Or not if you're forced, but if you choice of even choosing a door, is the choice. It's not the door that was the choice. It's the choice to even choose any door that would be the choice. It's kind of meta choice. It's weird, but okay, we're almost done. I know this went a bit long, but it's a 4-hour stream between Lee Cronin and Lex. I mean, try reducing a 4-hour stream to 2-hour commentary. It's just, I mean, I guess you could do it, but I'm not good at it.
I haven't quite got there yet. I was playing on the aeroplane coming over. I just realised I have no idea what real numbers are. And well, I do actually have some notion of what real numbers are. And I think thinking about real numbers as functions rather than numbers is more appropriate. And then if you then apply that to CAs, then you're saying, well, actually, why am I seeing this complexity in this rule? Is it you've got this deterministic system, and yet you get this incredible structure coming out. Well, isn't that what you'd get with any real number as you apply it as a function?
This is fascinating because I talk about this a lot, and I talk about how like numbers have an objective context, and in that objective context they have objective meaning. Not saying that your numerology websites are going to be able to tell you anything about your life. I'm just saying that there is an objective context in a model of objective growth of the cosmos in which certain quantities manifest for the first time, and in those moments you can actually perceive what they represent. So like I've talked about on here, 33 manifests in a grid. When you take a grid of information processing, where basically you're multiplying and adding information at the same time, which really comes from the subtraction and division of information at the same time. So basically objective growth, a model of objective growth. In that matrix, the number that pops up at the finality of that matrix is 33, and it's a 3x3 matrix. So it is a 3x3 matrix contemplating itself. So it's contemplating 3x3, and people say that's just crazy coincidence. It's meaningless. There's no such thing as meaninglessness, even if your world is just purely mathematical and deterministic, and there's no consciousness whatsoever. There's no such thing as coincidence. And what it is it's contemplating itself. Like when you if I say think about yourself, you think about a smaller version of you in your head, kind of smaller, but it's not a smaller version. It's like a reduced version, which is different than smaller. and it's like an abbreviation. And so an abbreviation of a 3x3 matrix is a numerical representation of 3x3, which you see 33. And this sounds so crazy, and I understand that. I get it. It's just sounds like it's just woo-woo nonsense, but it's not. And here, let's look at that real quick. So this is one of my very first models, and it's just about like contemplating information, or calculating information. So you put in a 0, you have no input. But you always have to start with one input, because that is what you can't start with multiple bits of information. You have to start with one bit of information. Always, that's just objectivity. So 1. And here you have, this is basically adding and adding internally, but then here multiplying and adding. So it's multiplying as you go up, adding as you go across information, and it's basically spinning the information. And this is a model of objective growth. And at the end, you get 33. And what makes this model objective is that it is internally symmetrical. Okay, so you look at how this is structured. No matter what, it is structured in such a way that is symmetrical. So whatever you do here, so for this, you can do this two ways. You can go this plus this. But if you do that, then you have to go on the other side, and you have to go, because symmetry is how you identify objectivity, because you're looking for the center, and you identify the center through symmetry. So, but you can also just do this. So you can do this plus this. But if you do that, then you have to do it to the other side. And if you do this, you get the same exact values no matter what inside, if you do this properly, which is why this is not just arbitrary, it is objective, because you always get the same values. And as long as you keep things symmetrical and you recognize that you have input, action, result, action, result. And when you're looking at information changing in a system, so if you want to go from this, where zeros are the red and ones are the green, to this, where it's basically a line of ones through zeros, or a line of greens through reds instead of a line of reds through greens, or a line of zeros through ones. You have to maintain information coherence, which means you have a specific defined set of steps that you can go through, and for every single thing you have a perspective, and then you have an action, which is the change from this to this. And then you have a perspective, and then you have action, and then perspective, action, perspective, action, perspective, action. So and there's 17 steps to change every bit of information in this matrix without relying on superposition possibilities like quantum computing. So this would be like classical computing. Quantum computing would be like this. So you have the initial state, and then you change all ones to, whatever. You could do Control-H, and you could do 0, 1, Oh, that didn't work. Basically, this is a superposition where it could be 1 or 0. But it allows you to preserve information coherence and still... I have a video that shows this on my YouTube if you want to see this animated, and it will show you in a video like the information changing, and you can look at this this 3-step or 3-action method, which is only possible with sentient beings, and then, or quantum computers, kind of. And then you could also look at like a classical computing information change, which is why quantum computers can theoretically, handle much bigger problems. So perspective, action, perspective, action, perspective, action. That occurs here in information growth, and you calculate 33. So it's calculating itself. I call it an extra arithmetic symmetry. It's a symmetry that is occurring outside of just mathematics. You have you as an external observer can see that this is a 3x3 matrix, and then you can also see that it is calculating 3x3, which is 33 is 3x3. It's super literal. 3x3. It's not nonsense. It seems like it. I get it. It seems like I'm making it up. It's not. What's interesting is that if you take, let's say that 33 represents self-awareness. It's like a 3x3 grid looking at itself in the mirror sees 3x3, which is interesting because when a 3 looks at itself in the mirror, it sees itself. And so it's like you're getting this super symmetry going on where it's definitely symmetrical structure being created of information, and but it's transcending mediums. So it's the structure is a reflection of the information being processed within it, or the information being processed within it is ending up as with an outcome that is calculated, that is a reflection of the structure that it's being calculated within. And so 33 represents self-awareness, let's just assume for the sake of argument. If you take that number and you add it to 9, which is a 3x3 matrix, is 9. So if you take the value of the information calculated within a structure, resulting in self-awareness, and you add it to the value of the structure that it took place within, that this reflective calculation took place within, you get 42, which is fascinating because I think it was Donald Hoffman, or it might have been Yosha Bach, who was talking about construct awareness. It might have even not been him. If it wasn't Yosha, then it was oh gosh, I forgot his name. He reminds me of Yosha though. He was just recently in a discussion with Sabine Hassenfelder on Kurt J. Mungel's channel. I forgot the guy's name. I don't know why I'm blanking on it, but I'll look at it in a minute. But I think it was Yosha though. He talks about how construct awareness is like wisdom, I think. And like true wisdom is true construct awareness. And what is the construct that you are within? And what is the construct that you are? And what is the construct that you're composed of? That's what true construct awareness is. It's awareness of all of those constructs. But they are all the same construct. They are all sentient beings. So if you are aware that you're within a sentient being, and that you are a sentient being, and that you're composed of sentient beings, that is construct awareness. And it's like true wisdom. But it also comes from the understanding that you are in a hierarchy. What's interesting is that 3 plus 3, or 33, this self-awareness, it perceives itself as the same as what it is a reflection of. The same, it is weighted the same as what it is reflection of. 3 and 3 are equal, and 3 and 3 together are 6. 42 is 4 and 2, which is also 6, and 6 is this number that pops up in my models as the number of dimensions in an interaction space between an objective and a subjective sentient being. So the universe and us inside the universe, or us and cells inside of us. That's why you have space-time. From our perspective, you have 3 degrees of freedom, or I guess you don't have 3 degrees of freedom, but you have forward positive degree of freedom, negative degree of freedom, and in the intrinsic constraint that is defined by you, and then the universe also has its constraint and degree of freedom. And what is interacting is, we're subject to time, so it's not interacting with us in the way that we are able to. We are not able to interact with time, but we're able to interact with space. So, say the place in which we can maneuver and interact with the universe, literally, is in our ability to maneuver within space. The universe's ability to interact with us and maneuver within that interaction space is within time. So it makes changes in the flow of time, and we make changes in our maneuvering within space. And I mean this super literally. This interaction space is a 6-dimensional space. Okay? So, and you can think about this as past, present, future, length, width, height. Forwards, backwards, current location, and future moment, previous moment, and present moment. Like, these are over 3 overlapping temporal dimensions with 3 overlapping spatial dimensions. And you get this 6-dimensional interaction space. And so it's interesting because 3 and 3 is 6, basically showing that your relationship with another is kind of a 6-dimensional, takes place in a 6-dimensional environment. And a 4 and 2 is also 6 dimensions. But what's interesting is that it's no longer equally weighted. Okay, 2 is 1/3 of the total value, which would be 6, and 4 is 2/3 of the total value of 6. Which this is also a symmetry with my cosmogenesis model, which shows that basically God had to divide his energy by 3 in order to create creation. So he puts 1/3 of his energy into creation, and it's just a mathematical and logical inevitability. It's much simpler than it seems. It's profound, but it's also like the math of the creation of the universe is the simplest math in the world. It's not the most complex math in the world. But this interaction space is a 6-dimensional environment. But you can see symmetries across this entire structure, and across mediums and across fields, and it's just fascinating and beautiful. If you look at Garrett Lacey's E8 theory, it's just E8 is this beautiful mathematical geometric structure, and it's the symmetries in it are just stunning. But it's also got, this ability to orient to some degree. It's not just perfectly symmetrical thing. And even if it is, from one perspective, that's because it's oriented around itself. So, like, that's the thing about sentience is it, or self-awareness is that you're always orienting around the center or you. And it's fascinating thing, because when you look at these symmetries and you see objective symmetries in the context of objective growth, you will see values manifest, and those values will manifest in specific instances in which their meaning is apparent. And that is what, similar to what he's saying about what Lee Cronin is saying about how real numbers are objectively functions. It's like they are actions. Because if there is no action, then there's just one. There's no other numbers other than one outside of action. So every single number is intrinsically going to be the product of a function, and or produced by an action. And there, if you contextualize that within true objective growth, true objectivity, which is in the context of objective growth, and in the context of like an objective symmetrical state, which is you do through the understanding of sentient beings, then you will be able to literally see the meaning of numbers, which is freaking amazing. I'm not saying we could easily see the meaning of all numbers. I can't tell you I can see the meaning of all numbers. But I can tell you 2 is linked to differentiation, and 3 is linked to like organization within a hierarchy, because you need 3 in order to like perceive weightedness, because you need 2 compared to 1. So you can't, if there's just 2, then you have 1 and 1. There is no directionality to it. But 3, you can do 3 to 2, 3 to 1, or not 3 to 1, 2 to 1. And then there's directionality. And what's interesting is when you look at quantum mechanics, you see triality, but you also see binary. You have neutrinos and electrons. You have up quarks and down quarks, or basically masculine quarks and feminine quarks. But then you also have this trialic structure to each of them: electron, muon, tau, up, and charm and truth, and down, strange and beauty. Like, you have these numbers manifesting, these quantities. And when you see it in objective growth, you see these quarks combining, 3 quarks combining into a hadron. That's the first step in growth. And you see 3 quarks in every hadron. It's a 2/3, 1/3 structure. A proton is 2 up quarks and a down quark. A neutron is 2 down quarks and an up quark. These symmetries are everywhere, but you can understand why they're there when you see them in proper context. And you see them through the identifying of quantities, which is what numbers are. And but if there was no action, if there was no function, if there was no initial division by 3, and then there would just be 1. It's fascinating. But he's right. Real numbers are objectively functions. I think that's pretty much where it this is the last statement in the last clip that we're going to look at, because it just shows how he is just on to, Lee Cronin is just onto something. It's amazing that all the people that are the best at physics are not physicists. It's like chemists,
that representation,
computer scientists,
you can now give it, I guess, the
psychologists. But here, this is the last clip. Right here.
has the memory of Einstein with that representation. But then you can now give it as a gift for free
Yeah,
to
it's
other
low
alien
memory.
civilizations.
Now, I also had to go through a lot of pain to get it, but it's low memory. So I say that physics and chemistry and biology are the same discipline. They're just physics, laws in physics. There's no such thing as a law in physics. It's just low memory stuff. Because you've got low memory stuff, things reoccur quickly. As you get building more memory, you get to chemistry, so things become more contingent. When you get to biology, more contingent still, and then technology. So the more memory you need, the more your laws are local. That's all I'm saying. And the less memory, the more the laws are universal, because they're not laws; they are just low memory states.
Brilliant. I always like to end on a positive, and on an agreement. But look at this. So if we go to sentientsingularity.com, my website, you want to look at the models. You look at the superposition stages of sentience. You have an atom of hadrons, okay? Physics, cell of molecules, chemistry, family of organisms. It's really like hadrons and atoms is physics, atoms and molecules, chemistry, then cells and organisms, biology, families and castes are technology. So physics, chemistry, biology, technology. But it's more like physics is like the rules of everything, then it is chemistry, then it is biology, then it is ecology, almost, which would be like sociology or morality. And so he's missing one, but he's on the right path. So the objective fields of study would be metaphysics, which is everything, because quantum physics is just metaphysics. It's not separate. Quantum physics is not the same field as Newtonian or general relativity or Newtonian physics. It's not. But those are only fields of relativity. They're not at all Newtonian physics and general relativity are not fields in the theory of everything. They're subjective fields. Metaphysics, which is like the standard model of particles, that is an objective field of study, kind of. We just need to realize that the pattern there is more important than the particles. And we need to realize what those particles are. Then you have chemistry. So you have metaphysics, chemistry. Then you have biology, which would be like cells and organisms. Then you have ecology or sociology or morality. You could even say economics, but it's not just economics. I would say morality. It's morality. And then you have technology. So, but technology is like metaphysics. It's not really a field of study. It's like just an ever-present fact. And then the objective fields would, because remember, it's 4 perspectives and 3 actions. So the 4 perspectives are metaphysics, chemistry, / biology, I guess, and then or chemistry, biology, and morality. But then this is hard. Let's look at this, actually. I want to do this real quick, and then we'll go. Okay, there'd be 3 actions and 4 perspectives. So if we go to information change. So you have this would be perspective slash result, and this would be action slash function. And then you would have just these fields. You would have metaphysics and technology. And then in between you would have, let's say, chemistry, biology, ecology, no, biology, genealogy, morality, I think. So you have chemistry, biology, genealogy, morality, maybe. Social. Interesting. I don't know if that's correct or not. All right, I'm going to answer final questions and then go. Greetings, Tyler. I've been watching a lot on string theory. Very cool. I wish that they knew what structures they were deducing, but they are deducing real structures. I'm sure you really resonate with that. That's fine. All right, guys, that's it. This has been too long, but I appreciate everybody being here. Please hit the like button. It helps with the algorithm. Please share this with anybody who you think would find it valuable. If you'd like to join our Discord, message me privately on Instagram. We will still have our Thursday 7 p.m. Open Discord call where you can talk to me about anything that you want. And until then, I will see you next week. We will be continuing to do these commentaries at least once a week, and I am working on, like I said, releasing the paper on sentient singularity theory, and then also the video that will walk through the paper. After that, we're going to have at least once a month videos that will either be live, not live, either be interviews with someone else who is doing interesting work in this field, or they will be on a specific topic and they will be produced where I'm just talking about it and it won't be live. But with that, thank you everyone, and I will see you later. Peace.